Well, it started for me kind of easily, actually. In 1981, I went in to see my doctor for annual checkup, blood work, etc. And he said, basically, you've got an inverted T-cell ratio. And I said, well, what do we do about that? He said, well, nothing. I said, well, what does it mean? I said, well, whatever's going around, you've got it. And I said, well, what's going around? It was later, later, 6 months later, people that I knew started dying. First big one was Spencer Beach. He was my sponsor in Al-Anon. He was one of the first 50 studied by the CDC to define what was going on. So around then, I went to volunteer at GMHC and fundraising, all kinds of things. My first role at GMHC was really to serve coffee. Then there were like 15 volunteers in the basement of a townhouse on 22nd Street off of 9th, and I'd go over at least 2 or 3 afternoons and bring coffee and donuts for them. I volunteered for the crisis intervention counseling team. That was the second team they had put together, so I guess there were up to 20 volunteers by then, whose job was to intervene in crisis, make sure that the hospitals were called, they checked into the hospitals, their social workers were on call, everything that they needed in a kind of crisis. Certainly hospitals are facing being thrown out of their houses or things like this, falling on the street, not getting insurance, any kind of crisis that would come up. And I had a client, Eddie Elias, he lived on 20th Street. The closest hospital to him was in the Bronx, Montefiore, which is about 2 hours by public transportation. And I went up there several times, meeting with his team. Unfortunately, at that time, if you hadn't spiked a fever in 24 or 48 hours, and you had no other signs, they would just discharge you because they didn't have anything else to do but discharge you. So Eddie was discharged on Friday night. It must have taken him, I guess they sent an ambulance for him to bring him back home. And I didn't hear from him again. The ambulance found him following Tuesday. He had fallen off his sofa on his arm and couldn't get up. And there he lay for however long that took. I suppose I could have done that again. I really didn't feel qualified to do that kind of work. I wasn't a big hero like the Roger McFarlane's and the Larry Kramers of the world and the Diego Lopez's, people that really did hard work and off into long hours. This kind of knocked me out a little bit, depression-wise. Basically, I went back to my church and sat in the pew for a while. It was around that time, or maybe earlier. My rector, Ledley Laughlin, this was the Church of St. Luke in the Fields in Greenwich Village, had done a lot of funerals and a lot of counseling, putting people together. They finally had a big service up at the cathedral at which he preached, and you've got to see this man. The pulpit was 20 feet high and about 10 feet square, and this little man is standing there among hundreds of people, and the first words out of his mouth are, "I have no good news," which is hard for a priest, for anybody to say. But he went on, he said, "There is no good news now, but there is hope." And his hope was that this was going to be something like the sequoia trees in the Northwest that cannot germinate unless there's a forest fire, and that we are in a forest fire now. So I went back to my pew, and of course Ledley appoints me to a couple other people to the AIDS ministry work at St. Luke's, a committee to figure out to this, and we came up with a couple of things. One was the dinner program. As it turns out, every night of the week was taken for dinner programs except Saturday. So we started a dinner program on Saturday. This was good news for everyone, except, of course, the church school. Now, everybody assumed that these would be nice, logical, well brought up, educated and people. And when presented with this idea that we were going to serve people with AIDS, they went ballistic and threatened to close the school. And Ledley, kind as he was, said to people who could understand him and people that were level-headed, said, you know this is irrational, right? He said, it doesn't matter. These are our children. We will be as irrational as we want to be regarding the health and welfare of our children, and we will close the school. So it took them a year to settle down. We made other arrangements in those crazy times, and we eventually got into the church, into the dining room and cafeteria. And having put that together and organized people and got them going, I just washed dishes. And you had to sign up well in advance. This was a very popular program to volunteer for, and I washed dishes maybe once a month, which didn't seem like a lot. At the time, it was, getting my hands dirty and clean, but several of the guests were just so grateful, not just to have food, but this was the only time they had food served on plates. Every other meal that they ate was on styrofoam and paper and disposable, and they kind of felt disposable, except at St. Luke's, and that was wonderful. So all of the food that we had and volunteered and was given to us by local markets and such, and people baked and made cookies and pies and such, and there was just too much for a Saturday night program. So we looked around and thought, oh, we'll take this up to St. Vincent's hospital and provide some food for them. And we went up there with every good intention, and they said, well, this is a nice idea, but we cannot serve anything that we don't cook, which you could understand. So we started an afternoon program there on Sunday afternoons of just having tea and cakes and sodas and juices and cookies, all the kinds of things that we were throwing away the night before, but staying there for a couple of hours and with the groups that were there, patients, of course, and the guests of patients who were glad to walk out of the room for a few minutes and have a little cookie or something, and have them be able to do something else than sit in a hospital room or in a hospital ward. The staff came, nurses, and the doctors and such. They were grateful to have a moment away from their work. And then other visitors, particularly the parents and the family of the men that were dying. It's hard to imagine what a mother goes through watching her son die. It's just so agonizing for them, and yet they come. And it's shocking from every point of view. And some of them didn't know their sons were gay, let alone dying. Imagine coming in from Des Moines or whatever, and I don't know the circumstances that this child may have left. Maybe he was, just left out to go to the big city, or maybe he was thrown out of the house, was not welcome wherever he was, and came to New York, and mom gets a call that I'm dying. Can you come see me? That's a phone call that I can't imagine ever getting. Mostly with the mothers, of course, how to face that and how to get through their own guilt and fear and visit and be with at those kinds of moments. And many of the mothers stayed after their sons passed on. to help when another mother came in from another part of the world to say goodbye to her son. And this was, I think, one of those very blessed occasions of ministry to people who were going through horrible ordeals with their families. And just recognizing that this is my child, and I have to be here. And this was very helpful to them, provide a place for them to talk to each other and learn how to deal with this. It really brought me closer to Easter. I think maybe older people relate more to Easter and younger people relate more to Christmas. I don't know. But Easter is, yes, about death, but it's so more about life that if you believe this is true, then love conquers death. And it's got to be, I mean, it's so plain if you're in a situation like this that love will conquer death. I mean, and that's good news. And it's also something that I don't think you appreciate until you've seen it and been with somebody that is dying, and to know that there is life from that. And if that's not true, then, well, I guess we all walk away. But it is true. The good news is that it is absolutely, and you see it around people trying to take care of each other, and wherever you see that, so that's good news. And then you dance, which is a celebration of life. A couple of individuals that I'd like to remember. One was David Rabine. He was in our beach house out at Fire Island one summer, and he was positive. And there's a big party, fundraising event on Fire Island called the Morning Party. Everybody, my God, the volunteers that come out for that are dozens to set up a dance floor on the beach, huge speakers, and provide, drinks and music and snacks and fruit and stuff. And it was the weekend of his parents' 50th anniversary. So as torn as he was, he went out to Michigan to be with them and celebrated with them. And then I guess it was towards the end of the week, he started going blind in his right eye. So he came back to New York on an urgent flight, went into the hospital on Friday, I guess it was. And they gave him the right medication for this. I can't remember what it was, infused into his eye. And his doctor said, well, that's all we can do today. Come back on Monday. And so they left the shunt in his arm. And he said, well, I'm going to the beach. And off he came out to the beach, and on Saturday, worked on an outfit, and on Sunday wrapped a bandana around the shunt in his arm where this pipe is sticking out, this tube is sticking out, and he went off to dance, because you gotta dance. You just have to be alive in the time of so much death, and it's kind of shockingly wonderful.